Hey guys, it's Michael and welcome back to Let's Make Maps. This is episode 1, episode 0 being mainly just an introduction to what the series was going to cover and a brief look around. So this time, let's look at probably one of the key tools for making maps, and that is Photoshop. You can use a lot of different graphics editors. Photoshop is one of the best, but there are many others that do similar things. So GIMP is a free public license editor. It does a lot of the things Photoshop does, and in fact does some things that Photoshop doesn't do maybe. It has some limitations, especially in some of the techniques I'm going to show you. You can do them, but you have to accomplish them differently. So I might be able to answer questions about that or help you figure something out, but in general, I do know there are going to be some differences. PaintShop Pro is another potential. It's a pretty decent program, not as full-featured as Photoshop, but still good, and it's much less expensive. Photoshop Elements has most of the same features, but there are limitations, so bear that in mind. It is a lot less expensive. A program like Painter or Project Dog Waffle, different set of features with a different end goal in mind. I mean, Photoshop is used by graphic designers. It has a lot of elements that work in ways that graphic designers want. Painter, as you might get from the name, is more of an art tool. I mean, it has layers, it has all kinds of different stuff, but the workflow in it is a little different. If you're making maps in Painter, and you can make some very beautiful maps in Painter, you might be relying more on art than the kind of techniques that I'm going to show you, and in which case I'm not going to be able to help much. So, Photoshop. Let's look at Photoshop. This is CS4. Don't know what version we're on now. I think they've got some sort of software as a service thing, but I still think you can buy standalone. It'll have some features this doesn't have, but we're going to just cover the basics here. First thing about Photoshop is let's talk about file formats. So Photoshop can open and save a huge number of file formats, some of which are even out of date and aren't really in common use anymore. It can load in EPS vector files, it can load in JPEGs and PCX and PIC files and Pixar files, all sorts of different things, Targa, TIFF. Its native format is called just simply the Photoshop format. PSD is the extension. And the PSD format is what you're going to want to save in most of the time, because that is going to keep all of your information. You're not going to lose anything. All of your layers, all your layer styles, everything. So that's a key bit. Now when we create an image in Photoshop, you can certainly just drag something in. Like I brought this screenshot in just by dragging it into the window. But when you create an image, you've got some options here. First of all, you can set up some presets. And second of all, you can set the width, height, resolution. You can choose pixels, you can choose points, picas, whatever you want, inches, etc. Resolution, if you're doing pixels, doesn't really make much difference. Generally, 72 is what's used when you're doing something that's going to be displayed on screens. When you make a document, you have to think about what is the end goal here for this document. Is it going to be printed? Is it going to be a poster? Is it going to be in the front of a paperback book? Is it just going to be on the web? Am I just printing it out on paper for my home use in a game or showing it on an iPad? All of those things are going to figure into here. So think about that, because you are not going to get any more detail. So if you start small and decide that you need it bigger and you just sort of stretch it, right, you're going to lose a lot of detail. There are ways of increasing the amount of room you have to work with, but if you just, if you've got your whole layout here and you decide, so like this is my, the size of my YouTube videos. If I suddenly decide that I'm going to start recording 4x or whatever, and I just make this that much bigger, it's not going to look very good. I would have to recomposite it, bring everything back in at the new size. If you just stretch this, it's just going to stretch and it's not going to look great. You can always go smaller, which is fine. To some extent. I mean, you'll lose details, right? You will see guys like concept artists starting small and expanding as they add detail, but that's the key. They're adding detail. So they're starting small, working with a small file size that's responsive, and then growing that as they get more and more detailed. So different process. You could apply the same process in maps, but again, that's not what I'm going to be showing here. So I'm just going to make a document, and we'll have it open and we'll be able to play with it. I'm just going to make it screen resolution. You've got some options here. You've got RGB color, grayscale, CMYK, lab. I usually use RGB. If you're doing print, you will have to learn about colors, a lot about colors. And you'll have to talk to the people that are doing the print side of things. And I haven't done much of that. So I'm mostly on screen. And then you also have the bit depth. Again, another thing that you want to take a look at. You can certainly go 3832. Notice what it does to the memory size. 12 megabytes as opposed to 48 megabytes. These files get big, and it takes a lot of processing power for them sometimes. Okay, so the structure of the document. The most important thing, we can, now that we've opened this up, right, we can grab a tool like a pencil. Well, we can't because it's locked over here, but okay. Why can't we grab anything? Okay, well, here goes me not knowing why something happened. Did I do something wrong? Okay. Did not work with 32-bit per channel. Convert to 8 or 16 bits per channel. Okay. So I'm not sure why I did 32. I was just sort of talking. Let's just redo this. New. We won't make it 32. We'll make it 16. And we'll see if we can now do something there. There we go. So all I did was add a layer. If you look over here, this is the layer stack, which I think is the official name for it, but that's what we'll call it. You got all these little panels, right? So this is one panel. Layers, channels, paths. Layers is the one you're going to look at a lot. So in layers, we got a background layer here. It's got a little icon here that shows that it's locked. The background layer is fairly useless. Just gives you a background. If you delete that, you get this checkerboard thing. And that sort of implies to you that you will see through whatever this image is on top of. So if you're making a button for the web or whatever, you'd want to have maybe this as the background when you save it out. That way you're going to have transparency, proper transparency. But we don't really care about that. So we're gonna just draw here on this layer. We can actually fill. This is the paint bucket. It fills with whatever color you're using. This is the foreground. This is the background. You select colors in this color picker. These are all very common sort of tools that you might see. I'm just going to pick a gray color, and I'm going to fill. There we go. Now we got something on the background. And we can grab a tool, change a color to something visible, and we can just draw, right? So that is now just sort of pixels on the screen. We can grab it, we can do lots of things to it. I can grab it, I can move it around, I can resize it, I can do lots of different stuff to it. It's on one of these layers though. So that thing is on this layer here. If we turn the eyeball off, you can see it goes away, right? So it's very important to understand how to use layers. If we grab now a different color and draw, so should probably use something bigger than a pencil. Now we've done this, right? If we were doing this in one layer, these two things would be sort of inextricably intertwined. You usually don't want that. If you're painting, fine. But if you're actually doing something where you need to have discrete objects, things you want to move around, trees or buildings or whatever, you're going to want them in separate layers. So see, we can move these completely independently. There's also a lot of things we can do with individual layers. So let me delete these. You can just do that, or you can hit the delete key with them highlighted. If you want to keep a layer from being deleted, throw a lock on it. That'll prevent you from drawing into it. You can also add folders to organize things, so we can create a folder and drag things into it. You can change the ordering, how things are ordered, what's in front of what over here. Lots of different features to explore, so spend time exploring that. But for now, I'm just going to draw a little box here. So I'm going to grab, this is the marquee tool. This is how you do selections. You got a elliptical one. You can select a row, a column, but I'm using the rectangular one. So I'm going to pick a color here, and we'll just, doesn't matter. And this is the selected area. So I'm going to paint that green. And now we can deselect this. You can use some shortcuts. Control A selects everything. Control D deselects everything. So now we got a box on layer 2. So if we want to, we can call this something else. So we can call this a house, let's say. So we have a green house. Well, what can we do with this? Well, you can use something called layer styles. And we will use layer styles a lot. You can do a lot with these. So we can click drop shadow, and you see now that it's got a drop shadow attached to it. We can do a lot of things to that drop shadow. We can make it blurry, we can move it away, we can change how it spreads out. So if you were making a house, you could use this as a shadow. Not the best way, because if you look at it, you can see that obviously this isn't working like a real world shadow does. We have a corner that's separated there. But it is a quick and dirty way to do it. You can do lots of other things too. You can put a glow around stuff. You can bevel and emboss it. So for instance, we could do something to kind of make a roof shape if we wanted to. So there's this. Now if you take this and you put a brick texture on it or something, it's going to start to look a little more like a house. And then if you do some fancy things like a better shadow and stuff, and actually the shadow could work, right? If we consider that the roof is above and the actual walls of the house are maybe here and all we're seeing is the roof shadow, possible, right? So there's lots of different things you can do. I'll show you guys how to make some good shadows, but in general, this is a technique we're going to be using a lot, is messing around with layer styles and doing other things too. So actually, and let me just show you, so we can click here. The eyeball will turn off those, but you can also clear the layer style just to get rid of it and make it go completely away. If we duplicate this layer, all right, and I'm going to drag it underneath. So now we have two layers that are exactly the same. I can move it around. If I take that and we can do something fancy over here, I can select it. By the way, if you hold the control button and click in the little picture icon, you will select every pixel in that layer. So let's do this, and let's just paint it. Let's just paint it black, right? So now we kind of mimicked our little shadow layer, right? Except now we can do a lot more things with this. For instance, we could blur it. We could do lots of other things to it. I'll show you guys filters at some other point, but for now, just know that you can create lots and lots of different layers to represent one item. We can duplicate this again and put it above. We can go in here and apply a bevel and emboss to it and make some changes to it. So if we do a hard chisel on it, a little bit of soften, push it all the way up to the top like that. Now what we've got is a layer that's got that on it, but what we can do is we can do some little nifty things here. We can turn the fill on that layer off, and what's going to happen is what we're really seeing now is the green underneath that layer. See, now this doesn't have any color. All it is the bevel and emboss. So what does that let us do? Well, that lets us take this layer and put a texture right on it. So pretty cool stuff, actually. And let me show you guys. I grabbed some textures off of that UK site that I mentioned to you before. And these are all supposedly tileable, but it doesn't matter for what I want to do. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to come into here, and just above this layer, I'm going to paste it down. And I'm going to transform it. So again, lots of different things to learn, but Control T will transform, and we can scale this layer. I'm just grabbing the corner little bar and moving it. This isn't a Photoshop tutorial. You can find tutorials that will show you all of these magic buttons. So I definitely suggest that if you're new to Photoshop, that you give it a go. Try it out. See what you can learn from tutorials. So now we've got this little texture thing that's underneath. We don't even need this anymore, right? The only reason that we'll keep this is because we can select the shape of the house with this always. No matter what happens up here, no matter what we do to it, we can select this shape of this house. So if I selected it now, and I go to our little layer with our texture, let's call it tile. And obviously it doesn't look realistic, but it's still tile. Another neat selection trick, most of these things are available up here in this menu, by the way, is inverse. Control-Shift-I or Shift-Control-I. We had this selected. Once we select inverse, we're selecting everything but this. And if I just hit the delete key, it will delete that. It'll just trim that fringe off of there. So now what we have is a texture underneath this shading thing that kind of looks like a roof, and a little bit of a shadow underneath it. If we did something fancy, like used filters, and maybe did a Gaussian blur on it. Gaussian blur is just an algorithm that blurs, and you can alter the radius of that blur here, and you'll get a preview on screen. So we can blur that a little bit, and we can also change how much we're seeing it, right? So we can turn it down a little bit so it's not quite as visible. Depends what you want to do. We can also do a thing where if we had, for instance, let's just say we had some ground under this. I'm just going to come here. It'll paste on the layer above the one you have selected. So now we got some ground in there. We can make that bigger. I didn't realize it was going to be so small, actually. There we go. A little bright, but that's okay. So we can take this now and actually that's crazy bright. Let's do a little bit of this. You can go and you can make lots of adjustments to your image, right? So I am going to simply go into hue and saturation, and I'm going to turn it a little darker, and I'm going to reduce the saturation a little bit. And again, you'll do this for everything to modify stuff. You can also do it in layers here. This introduces what's called this is a mask, the thing down here in the lower right, if you can't follow my mouse, lower right hand side. This is a mask key, but this isn't exactly the same stuff that we just did. Hue, saturation, vibrance. You can go in and actually change very specific things about how this image is being displayed using one of these, and you can make it do it only within a certain shape. So we could just select a square and have only that be modified. Very, very useful stuff. Again, back to the layers. So this is our shadow, right? Let's rename that shadow. If we take this little shadow here, you can move it around a little bit. Let me put it up to full. Notice how now we can't see any details in here. Let me zoom in a little bit because it's kind of hard to see. Hold the shift spacebar and you get a hand where it let you move the thing around. So now once we get in closer, you can see, okay, maybe that doesn't look so hot, right? Well, we can change, this is the blend mode of the layer. Again, more things to learn. But this little set here essentially takes what's beneath and sort of modifies it in a way that will make them darker. This set here modifies it in a way that will make it lighter. And you know what? You just got to play with these. If you want to go read the technical descriptions of them, you certainly can. But honestly, you just got to play with them. But multiply essentially takes the dark areas of the thing you're using and adds them in a way that darkens what's below. In this case, it's just one color and it's black, so it's not doing that much difference. But if you had multiple colors, it might do something for you, or multiple shades, for instance. And with that, I'll show you one more thing that we can do. This is not a particularly good layer for this, but it's like a dirt layer, a grunge layer, and I like to use grunge layers a lot because it adds some variety. If we paste that guy in, I'm going to Control-T to resize it. I'm going to make it bigger. Well, that doesn't look very good, right? But okay, gotta accept those changes and put it on there. It doesn't look so hot, but if we instead put it on multiply, you see what happens. Every place where it's dark has just in the original image has gone dark, but the white bits are showing through. If we instead put it on screen, suddenly only the white bits are adding to this, right? And if we take it and we turn it down a lot, we just get a little bit of variety. So you can use these kinds of textures, these kinds of detail textures, to add a lot to your scene. This could be clouds overhead if that's what you wanted to do. And again, we're not making a realistic map here, right? So this doesn't look like anything, but I'm just showing you guys some ideas of how to use this software. So that is that's a good overview of the layers, I think. A couple features you're going to want to know about. When you make an change, there may be a setting that lets you do more with Control-Z, but generally Control-Z will only do one item. So if I do Control-Z here, we'll get rid of that move. But if I've got, if I'm painting in here, I'm making paint strokes, right? Each one of those is going to end up as an item in here, which can be a problem. So you can change how many items are here in the history, but let's say we want to go all the way back to there. So we just highlight all that, and I can delete everything in between. If we don't want to do that, we can go back. Let me show you an example. So I'm going to get my paint. Let me get a paintbrush, not a pencil. Heck is the paintbrush? I never use this thing. I think it's under the pencil, isn't it? There it is. Brush tool. Okay, so we got a brush tool, and I'm just, painting away. Oops, gosh, shouldn't have gone that direction. I should have gone up. Control-Z gets rid of our last one. Okay, that doesn't do anything, right? But if we really want to go all the way back, we can just do this. That kind of shows you a little better. And now if we delete those, we'll be right back where we were, and we can correct and do what we were going to do. And if you decide that, hey, I don't like any of what I did, we can get rid of it. Now, there is a point at which you won't be able to access history anymore. For instance, here. I guess we've exceeded whatever limit I have in there for it. These little guys can be dismissed by clicking this little double arrow, which will make them go back. Okay, so those are some interesting things to know. We've got the blend mode and the opacity. You'll play with those a lot to make things happen differently. Like let's see what happens if we try a different blend mode. So there's overlay, there's soft light. I use these kinds of things all the time for various things. So let's say we want to imply a hill, right? If we take let me turn this off and just add a new layer. And I'm going to grab my tablet, which again is a Wacom Intuos Medium, Intuos 5, I think. And I got the pen now. So I'm going to not see my cursor. Where is it? There it is. So I'm going to get myself a nice big brush over here, a big fuzzy brush. And you can change all kinds of things about the brush, and we'll talk about those later as we need them. But let me see, brush size. So the Wacom tablet has a nice little interface. It's got this little ring interface over here that lets you select some different things. And you can also do some hotkeys. Like I think my bottom one here is Alt. No, I guess that's the pan. Oh, wait. There we go. We can see what they are right there. Hopefully that's recording. I don't know if it is. So we can't just paint here on this layer, right? Okay, it's a little sensitive, this tablet. You want to watch out, because every time anything gets over here, it wants to bring up the little menu there. I'll make that bigger. Maybe not that big. And let's just give an example of what we could do. So let's say we want to make this little house on a hill. And we got the light. Obviously the light, here's a key thing in your stuff. Pay attention to where the light's coming from here, and I didn't do. So by our shading on the roof, we're indicating that the light is coming kind of like this, right? It's a little lighter on this side than on this side, but mainly it's hitting this part. So our light is coming here. I've got this shadow completely 45 degrees off, which is not what you really want. Probably something more like this. And if it were very overhead, you'd get more even spread. So it's fairly low. It's a little bit low. So we can push it back like that, and that's going to be a much more realistic shadow. It's easy to miss these kinds of things, but let me tell you, if you get them right, the brain knows. you may look at a map and go, oh my God, that's really nice. But if these things are off, you will know. And even though you might not in the front of your brain know, the back of your brain knows. And it'll just look a little queer. So just pay attention to them, and it will serve you immensely well. If we go now, and we've got that correct. Let's say we want to make this guy on a little hill. Well, the light side of the thing should be over this way. So I'm going to, geez, that's awfully bright and thick. I'm just going to make some adjustments to that. And I'm scribbling. It doesn't matter because we are going to do some Photoshop funny business to this to make it work for us. So here's me scribbling. Oops, I didn't want that to happen. I grabbed the thing up there. So there's one layer. I'm going to go ahead and name it. We'll call it light. And you know what? There's way too much to cover in any one 30-minute episode. So I'm just covering what I can, and I'm trying to do it in a way that seems logical. But if I'm skipping something that seems obvious, leave me a comment. Let me know what slipped by, what I didn't cover that you would like to know a bit more about. What obvious thing did I miss telling you guys about? So feel free. So I'm just scribbling some shade on here, and I don't like this brush. I don't like where it's doing, but it doesn't matter. We're just scribbling some shade. Now that looks like not good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on screen mode. Maybe not screen mode. That's a bit too light. Let's try color burn. No, too much. Burn. Let's just try overlay. Sometimes overlay is a really good one. You gotta play with this. If we do that, and then we let's just try overlay with this one too. That's not going to work right. That's giving us like a glow instead of an overlay. So after you go through these things and then you go, wait, what the heck's going on? Go back through them and go, wait a minute, what can I do differently? If I turn that down, what will happen? So I don't have the light nailed. Probably it's just too uniformly white. Let's get rid of it. I'm just doing Control A and deleting. So let's draw in this mode. So now I've got it on screen at 49%. I'm deselecting everything there. And let's just, no, wrong way. Notice, by the way, I painted with black. It doesn't do anything because screen mode is ignoring the very dark colors. Nothing down there is darker than black, so it's not giving me a problem. So I'm switching colors using X to the foreground, which is white at this point. And I'm just going to, instead of what I did before, I'm just going to do some of this by hand. Maybe white is not the right color. You have to do this fairly subtly. And this isn't really cutting it as far as subtle goes. So, but that is exactly what making maps is about, is finding out what works, especially in your current situation. There are a ton of things you can do. Some things are artistic, some things are purely technical, like messing around with the shadow and doing lots of things like that. But in the end of it, if you work on it hard and try to think things through logically, you can end up with something that looks pretty good. We can do lots of things. We can make this stuff pop by giving it some overlay, some texture. We could go in here and paint it if we wanted to, so this would look like a three-dimensional rock a little bit. We can do some neat stuff like, let me do one more thing here. I'm just going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to give it a mask, and right now this mask here, this is what this is, right? If we hold Alt, we can edit the mask. If I select the whole thing and I just paint it black, deselect it, and now click back on the picture, this is not showing, right? If I turn off the mask, disable layer mask, we see it. But if I turn it back on, we don't. So I'm enabling it, right? So what we can do with this is, this layer style is only going to apply to things that are actually showing up. So we can, I think, if I'm not mistaken, selectively add back into this this map here. So if I go, wrong thing. So I'm drawing into the actual layer. You got to click on the layer mask. So I'm going to delete those. Click in the layer mask and get white, which is going to add to the thing. Now, are we doing anything with it? Our effects may not work on this. Let me see if they do. Let's try something a little more bold, like color overlay. Yeah, it does work. Okay, so we just have a very subtle setting here. Let's turn it up to max so that we can really see what's going on here. There we go. And let me turn down my brush size, and we'll have to end this episode real soon, but I just kind of want to show the sorts of things you can do. Now notice this has got a white line around it. That means I have that selected again. So make sure you're clicking in your layer mask. And all we're doing is drawing into the layer mask to expose a copy of exactly what's underneath, but we're applying a bevel to it selectively. Right? So just that simple trick I can use to add a lot more depth to this ground here if I want to. I'm making these rocks look sort of more like they're actually three-dimensional. We can do the same thing with, let's zoom in. This is totally sloppy, but for instance, we could make this little branch here pop up a little bit. And you can mess with the layer settings, obviously, to make them different. Make them work a little better for you. We could also do, for instance, we could throw let's throw a drop shadow on here, just a little one. See how that does for us. Can't really see it in most places. Oops, I don't want that. Now I'm drawing back in the layer. Stop. Turn that off. Keep my hand off of the left side over here. Okay. So now we're drawing into the layer. Notice how the drop shadow is kind of giving us a little bit extra definition. I mean, it may not be exactly what we want, but we can do it. And so this is a grayscale thing too. If we click on this again, take a look at it. You'll see that there are varying levels of stuff. Like this one is a nice smooth deal, which we may not want. We may want it to be more uniform. I mean, more abrupt. But in general, you can play with all aspects of this thing. You can change how much we're going to actually do, how subtle the effect is going to be. You can even apply filters to this. So if we want, we can go back to this Gaussian blur filter that I used a bit ago. It's going to take a bit probably. And we can turn it up and you see what happens there. Of course you get the edge dragged in too. But so you can use filters on this stuff. You can do all kinds of things. You can bring in existing photographs. If you wanted to hide a logo in the background, you could do a black and white logo and then make it really subtle. You know, there's just a ton of things you can do. So I'm going to leave it there. There's so very much more to learn. I didn't even get to show you a couple of other things that I was sort of hoping to, but hopefully this is a good start. And again, if you have any questions about specific things, let me know. We will look at more of this kind of layer manipulation next time around, and we'll try to do something a little more coherent with it. One of the things I want to show you is this RPG city map generator, which you won't be able to see anything about right now. And then I also want to show you this. In Compotech, this guy, Kevin, not remembering his name for some reason, is an awesome composer, and I use his music at the front of my video. But he also the way I found him originally was graph paper. The guy has a programmatic creation of graph paper. It's beautiful if you want to do like game maps and that kind of thing. It's got all kinds of different stuff. You can download these as a PDF file. You can establish all the details of them. Download them as a PDF file. Photoshop will import PDF files, in fact, and just, you know, the outlines of them, and then you can do all kinds of things with them. Very, very, very handy if you're making some sort of game thing, a grid type of deal. I don't know, it may be able to do like world grid lines and stuff too. So we will look at some more of that stuff next time, and thanks very much for joining me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful. If so, let me know, and let me know what you want to see. All right, talk to you soon.